All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and this is a special bonus podcast. It's a fan request from the pro-shroud expert and non-religious agnostic, John Loken. Essentially, back in October, uh, John Loken reached out to me by email because there was, in late October, there was a lot of news going around about a Brazilian fellow who claims to be a quote unquote graphics expert named Cicero Moraes, last name spelled Moraes. And he apparently wrote a paper, a 25-page paper, and did some YouTube videos that quote unquote disproved the authenticity of the Turin shroud by means of analyzing the drape of the shroud cloth over a body. And basically, he says that the image must have been made using a shallow bas relief and not a real human body, because there would be inevitably be various distortions and that sort of thing. And this is proclaimed as news by the Shroud skeptics, who obviously he's totally ignorant of STIRP and has no clue that we've known about this for decades and have responded to it. But this skeptic thinks he's smart and he thinks he's made news, refuting the Shroud because, hey, there's the wraparound distortion and all this nonsense from the skeptics. Anyways, so John Loken was kind of worried that, hey, nobody's been making comments on this. Why don't you do a comment show on him? And or why don't you reach out and invite Cicero himself onto your show to back up his claims against knowledgeable pro-shroud experts? And true to form, I did go over to his YouTube channel, and I did indeed leave a comment for Cicero. And let me see if I can pop that up. Or okay, it looks like he's deleted my comment. All right, so this is Cicero's 1 minute summary of his so-called new findings disproving the shroud. Let's take a look at what this skeptic has to say.
When you wrap a 3D object with a fabric, and that object leaves a pattern, like blood stains, these stains generate a more robust and more deformed structure in relation to the source. So, roughly speaking, what we see is a result of a printing stance from a human body would be more swollen and distorted version of it, not an image that looks like a photocopy. A bas-relief, however, wouldn't cause the image to deform, resulting in a figure that resembles a photocopy of the body. Any careful adult can test it at home, for example, by painting your face with some pigment liquid using a large napkin or paper towel or even fabric and wrapping it around your face. Then take the fabric out, spread it on a flat surface, and see the resulting image. This deformation is known as the mask of Agamemnon effect, as it resembles that ancient artifact.
All right, so this is the Shroud Skeptics video, and the well-known Mask of Agamemnon wraparound distortion effect disproves that it covered a human body and disproves that it's just due to direct contact. Joe Nichols mentioned this in 1986 for crying out loud.
I suggested then that the shroud image might have been some kind of print made from a sculpted relief. Later, in popular photography and other magazines, and then on television, including an episode of the In Search Of series and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.'s Shroud of Mystery special, I demonstrated the basic technique. Briefly, it involves molding wet cloth to a suitable bas-relief sculpture, and when it is dry, applying pigment with a dauber. Fake blood trickles that can then be painted on. I might just ad-lib one comment here. When you do that over a powdered image, of course, you more or less erase the image underneath the fake blood. Although shroud proponents had declared human artistry incapable of producing shroud-like images, the results were eminently successful. They were also, wrote Shroud critic Stephen Shaversman, quote, embarrassingly simple. A rubbing technique like I have described automatically produces well-formed images. That is, they lack the wraparound distortions that would result from a more pronounced relief, body, or statue.
This has been known about since 1978, with the credible STERP scientists talking about it in their peer-reviewed journals. Anyways, I was in the comments. Looks like Good Shepherd Films is in there. But I basically invited him onto my show to defend his skeptical claims against the Shroud. And of course, as is typical, the Shroud skeptic just ignored it, and it looks like he's deleted my comment. But just so you can hear what I said, here was my comment to him. I basically said, "Hello, Cicero. Congratulations on gaining all that media attention for your study. Of course, the wraparound effect issue has been known about for decades now and was already addressed by the STERP scientists themselves who studied the Shroud back in 1978. I don't see any mention that you are familiar with any of the pro-Shroud responses to this mask of Agamemnon or wraparound distortion issue, nor do you seem aware of the actual scientific experiments conducted on various bas-reliefs proving that inevitable lateral distortions also arise using those, and thus won't create true Shroud image replicas as you claim they do. I'm an expert or an amateur expert in the Shroud, as I have founded the Shroud Wars series, whereby I invite the experts on to discuss or debate the Shroud evidence. One such expert asked me to reach out to you to see if you might be willing to come on my show and speak about your findings and give you feedback as well about your views on the Shroud of Turin. Would you be interested? If so, please email me." No email from Cicero. Once he finds out the pro-Shroud experts are willing to come on and reveal the truth about his claims, he chickened out. He never showed up. But guess what? Regardless of Cicero's cowardice, we do have actual pro-Shroud experts who have thankfully responded and thoroughly refuted Cicero's claims. And this is from the update on the shroud.com website, the December 7th update. And I just want to read over 4 of the responses that we got from some of the pro-Shroud experts. And again, I'll share my screen just so you guys can see what I'm reading. So this one first comes from a post from Doug Powell on 4 reasons why the news of the Shroud being proven fake are false. And Doug says, several articles have appeared about a new quote-unquote bombshell scientific study that proves the Shroud of Turin is fake. However, both the articles and the report itself are deeply flawed. Brazilian forensic facial reconstruction expert Cícero Moraes claims the Shroud never touched the body of Jesus because an image made by contact would be distorted when laid flat. Because the Shroud shows no such lateral distortions, it never touched the body of Jesus and thus is fake. He suggests the image could be made by laying the cloth on a bas-relief or a shallow bas-relief. There are several problems with Moraes' claims, and they show he has no understanding of the scientific evidence collected from the Shroud. The most rigorous research was done in 1978 by the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STERP. STERP performed more than 24 tests and measurements to collect data. They published more than 20 peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals that Moraes clearly has no familiarity with. STERP could not determine the cause of the image, but they did prove what it did not make the image, as well as several other features that cannot be explained. No pigment stain or dye, paint, oils, scorching, or biological material caused the images. The image has 3-dimensional information that indicates the distance from the cloth was from the body. The image on the front of the body is on both sides of the cloth, and then finally he talks about the body image does not appear on the cloth beneath the blood. Don't forget, we also have kind of contradicting Cicero here, Moraes. Don't forget, we have the blood stains from the sides of the face that Gilbert Lavoie showed us, or from different angles, which would have been scientifically impossible for a medieval artist to duplicate. especially not having a proper bas relief in those positions and that sort of thing, that there is no sides of the face to paint these bloodstains that just happen to correspond to where the crown of thorn bloodstains or where the bloodstains on the sides would correspond on a real human body, full three-dimensional human body. Cicero's totally oblivious to this. Anyways, Doug goes on and says, quote unquote, oddly, the report suggests the image could have been made by draping the shroud over a low bas relief. This would also result in a warped image when laid flat. Exactly the same criticism the report makes of the shroud. In total, Stirp found 17 features on the shroud that need to be accounted for by any proposed method for how the image was created. Bas relief accounts for only 8 of them, and that's at best. That's just assuming the Shroud Skeptics' claims are correct. When we actually do experiments, they don't even account for these. And the 4 reasons above are only some of what is not accounted for. In the end, the only thing the study proves is that the image was not made by contact with a body. Well, that's what we've been saying for years. Direct contact. No one believes that direct contact explains the shroud images. Cicero, get up to date. Come on, we've moved beyond. Even Paul Vinian back in the 1930s was more knowledgeable than you. He wouldn't believe such foolishness, and that's why he went to his vaporograph hypothesis, because he realized direct contact just wouldn't do it. But you're outdated. You're back in the 1800s or something. You don't even know the basic information and facts about the shroud. Anyways, Doug continues, but that issue was settled almost 50 years ago. What is fake is that this is news at all. Some very damning words towards beloved Cicero's results here. Okay, let's look who we got next. Mark Rivera. Excellent. A physicist. All right, what does he have to say? He says, this article by Cicero primarily replicates previous experiments, but only this time in a digital format, using 3D modeling and fabric simulations to support the hypothesis that the shroud's image may have originated from a low-relief source rather than a full human body. This simulation approach does not introduce a novel hypothesis or provide any groundbreaking data, but rather reaffirms known results with a different methodology. In other words, who cares? This is worthless. We already know this. Proven scientifically decades before Cicero ever showed up. The physical experiments, along with arguments about artistic techniques in medieval Europe, have already explored the low-relief hypothesis extensively. The study assumes that the shroud image originated from a low-relief, bas-relief object without providing direct evidence to substantiate this foundational claim. Instead, it reconstructs an image based on this assumption, making further presumptions regarding how such an image might have been formed on the shroud. These presumptions, such as the specific mechanics of image transfer or the necessity of a low-relief structure, in other words, a low-relief, bas-relief structure, are introduced without concrete evidence to verify them, relying instead on inferences and digital modeling rather than on verifiable historical or physical data. Not the same caliber as Stirp. Sorry, Cicero. This approach lacks the rigor of grounded empirical evidence, leaving the hypothesis speculative rather than conclusively supported. Man, this is pathetic. This is the best the Shroud Skeptics can do. Pathetic. Pathetic. But let's go on, because Cicero's about to get another spanking from another pro-Shroud expert, Ray Downing. So what does Ray Downing have to say about this? Quote unquote, I've reviewed Moraes' paper, which has as its main thrust that the shroud image lacks the distortions which would inevitably result if a contact print was made from a fully three-dimensional human body. He observes that the image more closely resembles a similarly created contact image made from a low-relief representation of a human body. He holds that the low relief would create a less distorted image when the cloth is laying flat than would a fully 3D body. This is not exactly a new observation. The lack of distortion in the shroud images has been noted before from the STURP team, even before the STURP team was formed. Get up to date, Cicero. Come on, get up to date. Come on, skeptics. What is new here is his use of off-the-shelf 3D software to state the obvious and grab headlines under the guise of cutting-edge technology. In fact, the 3D software is superfluous, as the same observation can easily be made using a simple handkerchief and a few dabs of paint. This has in fact been done in the past, well before Cicero thought of it. The author's basic argument is a bit of tautology. He assumes that the shroud is a contact print image, then observes that a contact print image from a three-dimensional body does not look like the shroud image when compared to a contact image from a low bas-relief sculpture. Moraes then concludes that the shroud is fake because it was made from a low bas-relief sculpture, or more resembles, that should say. If, however, his assumption that the shroud image is a contact print image is incorrect, then his conclusion is a worthless, throw it in the trash bin of stupidity and ignorance. So why do authenticists believe that the shroud is a contact print image? Because the shroud doesn't look like a contact print image and doesn't have the characteristics of a contact print image. Below is a list of a few characteristics of the shroud which are a complete mismatch for images made by contact printing, including prints made from low bas-relief human sculptures, such as the ones Cicero proposes. 1. No evidence of any substance used to transfer the image by means of contact from the original object has been detected, so no paint, dye, pigments, burns, fluids, stains, dyes, etc. are present. The image is not made of a substance. It is pure linen, which has been affected by an agent which has degraded or oxidized it. If, like in the Garlic-Shelley experiment, an acid was used, then the linen would have disintegrated over time. 3. The shroud image is soft, diffused, and subtle. Contact print images are stark. They are an all-or-nothing type transfer system. The shroud image transitional tones are gradiated, not at all like a contact print. There seems to be image information on the shroud in areas where there is no contact, cheek alongside the nose. Superficiality would be unlikely in a contact print. Front and dorsal images on the shroud are not identical. There seems to be more than one method of encoding going on. Capillary flow would be unavoidable, but does not appear on the shroud. Off-body bloodstains would be unexpected in a contact print. The 3D character of the shroud image is far from what can be achieved with contact printing or with a Garlic-Shelley type transfer mechanism. 11. There has never been an experiment that replicates the shroud image using a contact print mechanism. So Downing concludes, and Downing is a 3D expert here. He says, this is not to say that the shroud is or is not authentic, or that a low-relief statue was not used in its creation. At present, no truthful person can pronounce the shroud to have been created by any mechanism unless they are prepared to reproduce the shroud image by experimentation using that mechanism. And if it isn't, then what is it? It must be the work of an artist or the work of human effort as the fraud of the millennium. However, the work of the Shroud Project was clear that there is no visible trace of paint, ink, dye, pigment, or stain to be found on the linen. Secondly, the image is purely superficial and penetrates only the top 1 to 2 microfibers of the cloth, not threads. Each thread is composed of approximately 200 microfibers, meaning the image penetrates only about 1% of a single thread. Adding to the complexity is that the image density is the same wherever it is observed, either on the front image or the dorsal image, a seemingly impossible result without the use of modern technology. Now, with regards to the recent article, Cicero Moraes proposes that the image could not have draped a full human form because once the cloth is pulled flat, the image would be highly distorted, with the face looking like a round dinner plate. Therefore, they conclude that it could not have been wrapping around a three-dimensional human form, such as Jesus. However, this is a conundrum that we've known about since the beginning of shroud research, and is precisely why physicists and other pro-shroud researchers have described the image as being vertically collimated, another feature here, mathematically proven in the peer-reviewed literature. Has Cicero read that? Nope, he's oblivious, meaning that the image formation process appears to be perpendicular to the cloth itself. It is not a radial phenomenon. The absence of the sides of the face, the sides of the body, and the top of the head indicate it is not a radial phenomenon. This has not led to a dismissal of the shroud, but rather an investigative clue as to the unique physics of the image. However, Cicero assumes that the image, if it were the result of miraculous light-generating event, must be a radial phenomenon, if it indeed wrapped a full three-dimensional body. Based on that assumption, foolish, ignorant assumption of the skeptics. They always do this. They always mindlessly assume if it's radiation, it's got to radiate in all directions equally and be a radial phenomenon, because that's what happens naturally. This is a supernatural radiation event at the time of the resurrection. That's what the hypothesis appeals to. You're not allowed to violate that. You have to suppose, okay, if it is vertically collimated, then it would solve this problem. Now, again, we can get into deeper debates, like Jordan from Reason to Doubt. He tries to say, well, that's supposing that is an ad hoc element. So he attacks the hypothesis as being complicated, not simple or something like that. But Cicero's not getting into any of these philosophical considerations and evaluating hypotheses here. He's just kind of mindlessly and ignorantly assuming that, well, this is the only way it could happen. If it is some kind of burst of radiation or light from the body, it had to go from all surfaces of the body. So we would expect to see the sides of the body. We would get the sides of the face, and that would lead to these wraparound distortions. Oh my goodness, Cicero, educate yourself. Please read a book on the Shroud of Turin or something, because we're so beyond you and your paper. We're just, it's not even funny on the pro-shroud side of research. Look, it's why we posit vertical collimation as a minimal relevant feature. We know whatever caused the image had to travel strictly vertically. It was not a radial phenomenon. Your assumption is horse manure. Do better, skeptics. Do better. I'm sorry, Cicero. Going on with Russ, quote unquote, the author then shifts gears and proposes that the shroud image correlates with having been draped over a bas-relief sculpture, a shallow bas-relief. This also is not a new proposal and has been discussed by world-class artists such as Isabel Pixac, who once said that if the shroud image was the result of a bas-relief, then it would have been one of the most miraculous sculptures ever made. The best example of a bas-relief is a simple coin, such as with the quarter, where we see the image of George Washington. It's actually, we're up here in Canada, in more civilized Canada, it's Queen Elizabeth that we have on our quarters. Somewhat a caribou, somewhat elevated above the background of the coin. The problem with bas-relief is that it presupposes either a rubbing with the use of pigment or the use of heat as a way of lightly scorching the cloth. This is also known as the hot statue theory. But neither theory holds up under close analysis. There is zero evidence of pigment having been applied to the cloth, regardless of the claim by microscopist Walter Macron, invoked by Cicero Moraes. Macron's allegations of the image being the result of iron oxide have been universally debunked. Blood chemists Al Adler and John Heller removed each particle of iron oxide from the mylar tape used to remove them from the shroud and painstakingly cleansed each one with various solvents. When analyzed a pristine particle without interference of the mylar tape, lo and behold, the so-called iron oxide particles were found to be shards of blood. Macron's claims were summarily dismissed because he failed to apply basic scientific protocols for particle analysis and was fooled by his own arrogance that he could identify a particle by simple observation with his eyeballs versus what the credible pro-shroud STIRP scientists used, spectral instruments and a thorough microchemical investigation. The theory has captured my imagination over the years is offered by theoretical physicist John Jackson, the founder of STIRP in 1978. He proposed what he calls the collapse theory, which postulates that as the body of Jesus was instantaneously converting to a volume of light, since light has no mass, the cloth under the weight of gravity began to descend through the body to a depth of about 8 millimeters until the body itself had completely vanished. The elegance of this theory is that it would account for how only the frontal facial features are captured and not the sides, because the body would have disappeared within a couple of seconds. This fall-through approach may explain why we see large orbits of the eyes, elongated fingers, and other structures such as the roots of the teeth. So, and just a note here, Bob Rucker, he doesn't go for this fall-through hypothesis or collapse theory. He has another. He's a nuclear engineer. You know, a little bit better than Cicero's background here in terms of understanding how radiation works. And with his vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis, also fully explains the vertical collimation process that formed the images during the radiation event of Jesus's resurrection. Moraes probably hasn't even heard of Bob Rucker, doesn't know anything about that latest research from this nuclear engineer. So, sorry, Cicero, you need to educate yourself. Start reading the pro-shroud literature. Russ Brault, skipping ahead, goes on. The work of Cicero Moraes offers no new information that we didn't already know before, decades before. The only thing new is the use of digital simulation. But the riddle remains unsolved, so who cares? It's worthless. Garbage and rubbish. All it is a confirmation of what we have already scientifically proved decades ago. Cicero's study, completely worthless to the cause of science. At best, it's supporting evidence, supporting what the pro-shroud STIRP scientists have been saying the whole time. Russ Brault goes on. Moraes also assumes the carbon-14 date range of 1260 to 1390 is probably correct. Okay, blah, blah, blah. The author's general acceptance of the erroneous carbon date caused him to reference 14th century funerary art as examples like the shroud, known as an epitaphios. It is a large embroidered cloth showing the front image of the crucified Christ with the arms crossed across the pelvis, as seen on the shroud. It is most associated with the Orthodox Church and is used as part of a liturgical procession on Good Friday. Usually embroidered on cloth, there are also painted versions, but I'm not aware of any version that shows both frontal and dorsal images as seen on the shroud. The shroud was most likely influential in the development of the epitaphios tradition, but to suggest the reverse, that the epitaphios inspired the alleged artist who crafted the shroud image without the use of paint, ink, dye, pigments, or stains, seems like a bridge way too far. In fact, there is no known artist in the 14th century who had the artistic skills and medical knowledge necessary to craft what we see with the Turin shroud today. Going ahead, to conclude, I give Cicero Moraes credit for using new digital imaging software, but unfortunately, he did not consider all the relevant data. This led him to an erroneous conclusion that was in sync with his preconceived assumption that the shroud is merely the work of an unknown medieval artist. This is a conclusion that was dismissed 50 years ago by a team of 33 scientists who had unfettered access to the cloth for 120 continuous hours. Digital techniques have their place, but are not a substitute for hard science. That's from Russ Brault, and I totally agree with these critiques. Cicero, thank you for some added confirmation using a new methodology of digital imaging. You've confirmed what I have always believed as a pro-shroud, and you've helped cement the truth that only a supernatural mechanism, vertically collimated burst of radiation, for example, could have formed these images. They cannot be explained naturally, and they cannot be explained with your bas relief, because even your shallow bas relief is not going to produce the same quality of three-dimensionality that we see with the shroud through a VP8 image analyzer or other software today, more modern software today. Incredible. Thanks for proving the Pro-Shroud case, Cicero. Love it. All right. With that said, that's my kind of spicy take on Cicero's thing. Why on earth is this getting millions of views? So many skeptics are just uncritical. They're not critical thinkers. They don't, here on Real Seekers, I'm used to engaging with ones that are like Hugh Ferry is, right? Although he makes some same claim, he also believes in a shallow bas relief. So many shroud skeptics are just eager and hungry to just mindlessly dismiss the shroud, no matter what, that they'll jump on anything. Oh, the latest CNN article. Oh, yes, the shroud's a fake. Oh, that makes me feel so good. Oh, yes, thank God. I don't have to consider the evidence and think for myself and consider whether it could actually be proof for a miracle. I could just mindlessly point to this guy. Well, he said it can't be this. Oh, well, didn't Luigi Garlashelli say the same thing back in 2009? Oh, I didn't know they said the same thing. But didn't Paul Vignon, talk about this issue back in the 1930s? I didn't have a clue. Come on, guys, you've got to do better than this as shroud skeptics. Cicero's work does not deserve the attention that it's getting. It's cool to have further confirmation of something STERP scientists have already known about and have proved. That's always great, but you don't deserve the Nobel Prize. You've not discovered anything new or significant in any way. These are the same critiques I gave. You can go back to 2018 and see my solo shows on the direct contact hypothesis. Way ahead of you, Cicero. I mentioned the wraparound or Mask of Agamemnon problem back then, before you ever existed on the scene, before you probably ever heard of the Shroud of Turin. I have no idea where you were back in 2018 on the Shroud or whatever, but I'm just assuming it's something you've come to relatively recently. Basically, my judgment is this is cool. Thank you for some confirmation of what we already knew. But your conclusions are complete horse bunk and do not logically follow. You have a non sequitur argument. It's an invalid or non-cogent argument. The conclusions that you make just do not follow from the premises, from the evidence that you submitted. Sorry. The wraparound distortion, nobody believes that natural direct contact explains the shroud images, and therefore you've proven nothing. So, yeah, that's it. Happy New Year to everybody. And look out in the new year. I've got a bunch of great stuff coming up in January, very big shows, including one huge one with Dr. Gary Habermas, Mike Lacona, Tony Costa, Sean McDowell, and Ben Shaw, all on one show and in one panel show discussing and celebrating the legacy of Gary Habermas in terms of his historical evidence for the resurrection, and his new 4-volume book, which is his legacy to Christian apologetics and resurrection scholarship. So look out for that. I'm going to be setting up the date. I've already got yeses from all those scholars. And hopefully it'll be sometime late January or early February at the latest. So, yeah, have a great week, everybody. And next week, January 4th, my first show coming back will be with Jamie Castro. And he wants to do something interesting. So if you're interested in the Shroud, it will be Shroud related. So he wants to, again, promote. Jamie's kind of the marketer. So he wants to spend 10 minutes kind of giving the sales pitch and again, about my Shroud Explorations Bible study and stuff like that. But what I think is interesting, that I like, that he pitched me for the show, is so after the sales pitch, I'll interview him about, what changed him about the Shroud and his understanding of the Shroud and stuff like that. But more interesting is we're going to switch places. He's going to become the host, and he's going to interview me on the shroud because he said he's so fascinated on the shroud. He has various questions about my take on the shroud and how I came to faith in the shroud and stuff like that. So I thought that would be kind of interesting to have somebody who's a very passionate newbie on the shroud of Turin research. Jamie, he's very, very passionate and thinks that the shroud evidence is amazing. He has an atheist wife, and even she's admitting this is it. This is proof Christianity's true because this proves the resurrection. And she's fascinated by the forensic evidence specifically related to the Shroud of Turin. So this has been very fruitful in Jamie's life, and I happen to be the one that introduced him to that. So yeah, we want to switch gears. He's going to turn into the host and start interviewing me and ask me questions about my take on the Shroud for his own information. So I thought that would be kind of interesting. So that'll be Saturday, January 4th. And again, I can't do live shows, but I'll have it posted up sometime in the afternoon for you guys. With that said, Happy New Year. Take care.